Welcome to the Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. You're listening here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. Today, we have a really interesting show. We're doing a follow-up to a show that we did a couple of months ago on sexual harassment. That original show we recorded before the Me Too movement and the Harvey Weinstein scandal and this kind of resurgence and awareness of what's been going on in our culture around how men and women are treated at work and how they treat each other. So I wanted to do this show, and I've got some amazing guests I'll introduce to you in a second, to kind of talk about, now where do we go from here? I think it's easy to have an opinion about a human being who treats another human being poorly, and how do we fix it, and you know, what are the systems that we can start putting into place so things are better for everyone. So I want to just kind of read you some stuff that I've been, noticing is that, obviously there's a huge wave, a rising wave of sexual misconduct scandals involving men from Hollywood to Colorado's halls of power, and everyone is on high alert. I think that in general, the Me Too movement and many employers are re-emphasizing their policies against sexual harassment and putting in education efforts and protections to make sure that it doesn't happen. And if it's happening, it's exposed. There's a lot of liability for organizations and individuals when this occurs. So, we're gonna start talking about this. Let me introduce my guests. Both of them are repeat guests. This is their second time, which is exciting. With me, I have Dr. Karyn Trader-Leigh. Am I pronouncing that right?
Leigh.
Leigh? Okay. She's the CEO of KTA Global Partners, and she consults on diversity, equity, and inclusion in strategy. Karyn helps organizations with transformative practices, culture change, gender equity, and unconscious bias. She is the executive coach and offers coaching certification training for the international coaching community. She and her husband lived in a war-torn country in Africa. Which country was that?
Liberia, and we continue to work in Sierra Leone.
Wow, awesome. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And also with me, after a long career in the federal government with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Carolyn Wheeler joined the employment and civil rights law firm Katz, Marshall & Banks in August of 2015. Currently, she's litigating 2 Title IX sexual harassment and assault cases in federal court, as well as representing numerous clients with sexual harassment complaints. She serves on the National Women's Law Center Gender Equity Network and provides legal advice to victims of harassment. Welcome to the show, Carolyn.
Thank you.
So glad you can come back.
Thanks.
So I think, I don't want to coach you guys too much. Let's start off with where you think we're at right now. I think, either one of you want to start off just kind of what's been going on over the last few months in your perspective. Karyn, why don't you go first?
Okay, sure. We're probably a heavy organizational lens because that's where my consulting work is. And I certainly think that organizations are really concerned about the issue. And I'm hoping that their concerns are as much about the women as they are about protection from litigation. As you indicated, many are sort of doubling down on training. And in some ways, I also have concerns that they're looking at the training more broadly in terms of not just the protections and advising people about, what the law says and what the company wants. But what does it mean to have culture change and to change people's behaviors in terms of how they relate on these issues, and to address the power structure issues that create a culture that drive these things.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a step back and talk about the kind of current problem, right? So the Me Too movement uncovered something. And what can we say, what would you feel like we could say has been going on and just hadn't really been revealed?
So I think one of the most amazing phenomena in the last few months is the number of women who have told their stories or heard other stories and felt that they can come out and say something horrible that happened to them, even if it was many years ago. So beyond organizational or employment or legal changes, I think the impact on individuals personally, psychically, has been really, really interesting to watch. That, I mean, many of the Me Too stories obviously were about events that happened 15 and 20 years ago, and there wouldn't really be, in most cases, a legal remedy under the statutes, for the anti-discrimination statutes, for something that happened that long ago. And yet still people are feeling empowered to tell these stories and to put things in a different perspective about what happened and how it happened, to eliminate some of the guilt that they felt over not having challenged it in the past when it occurred. Even Monica Lewinsky just recently wrote an article apparently saying that this movement has allowed her to look at what happened with her and President Clinton through a very different lens. Not that she's drawn any radically different conclusions, but it's been very helpful to her psychologically to see the breadth of this problem and to realize she's not alone. Everyone realizing they're not alone with this kind of behavior.
Interesting. So what do you think of this, of the Me Too
I wanted
movement?
to comment that
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. I think it's a very powerful cultural moment. And the power, I mean, it's become global, frankly, and I hope it has the same impact in some other country cultures as it's having here. But that, we've got a generation of younger women coming along who won't be silent, and who will have a sense of this collective voice that's out there. So,
could I just add to that? I would really contrast it to the last big cultural moment on the sexual harassment front when Anita Hill testified before Congress at Justice Thomas's confirmation hearings. And the impact of that was very different because the image of what happened is a single woman sits alone confronting an all-male panel who apparently did not credit much of what she said because Justice Thomas was confirmed for the Supreme Court, and she was vilified on many fronts. And the message there were some changes after that. That's when Congress passed the damages provision to create better remedies for sexual harassment. But just thinking of the kind of social impact, the real image you had is a woman alone and nobody supporting her or necessarily believing her. And that's a very different cultural experience from what we're seeing now with a movement that's called Me Too, that groups of people are finding each other and identifying with one another about something horrifying that's happened to them.
And for our younger audience, so Anita Hill...
That was 1991.
Right. So
1990.
So Anita Hill came forward and testified that Clarence Thomas, who had been nominated to have a seat in the Supreme Court, which obviously he has now, said that he had sexually harassed her.
Right.
And she testified before Congress, and particularly in front of, I remember, Kennedy, who was not particularly a good guy around women relationships. I remember during it, he was kind of like either half asleep or partly, like he couldn't really confront this. And through all of her testimony, nothing really happened. And but it did make it. It was a good. It was a stake in the ground. I mean, how would you characterize it when it occurred?
I want to add to that. Yeah. Clarence Thomas, when that happened, had been the head of the EEOC. So there was a deep and profound irony that the man who was supposed to be protecting our rights at that time was the harasser.
Right.
Joe Biden was also in the audience,
right?
Like Ted Kennedy. He later apologized to Anita Hill for not stepping up. So I kind of think that she is getting her day today. Mm-hmm. I think she's been asked to chair one of the committee that's looking at she's teaching at Brandeis, and she's now going to chair one of the committees looking at the situation in the entertainment industry. But there's also today beginning to be movement and momentum for the impeachment of Clarence Thomas for lying at that time.
Really?
Yes. If you look at the New Yorker has a story on the cover right now, because the other thing is that the congressman suppressed the other women whose testimonies were taken that would have validated everything she said with their experience.
Is that right?
So today, this is, and it is this movement, I think, that it's sort of like Monica Lewinsky, who was a 23-year-old at the time with a man who was in his 40s or better, So I think it is really pulling the covers back and giving those women vindication and all the women behind them who were silenced because of that.
So in both cases, not only an age disparity, but a huge power differential between the President of the United States and an intern in her first job out of college.
Right.
And I was at the EEOC at that time when Clarence Thomas was the chair of the agency. I didn't know Anita Hill. I think she was there a couple years before I started. But, she was on his staff. All of us who worked at the EEOC thought it would have been a much more interesting dialogue had Clarence Thomas not just simply denied every single thing she said, and instead engaged in a discussion of, so what really does create a hostile working environment? Because this wasn't inappropriate touching or propositioning her. There was other kinds of conduct that she found very offensive, talking about movies, pornographic movies that he liked to watch, just some kind of odd comments and behavior. Had he said, yeah, I did that, so what? It might have sparked more of a conversation about what kind of conduct is totally unacceptable in a workplace. I think after the Me Too stories, we're all pretty clear that sexual assault and propositioning people is intolerable. But we're not talking about a lot of the other things that go on that create a hostile working environment that are not necessarily sexual overtures.
Can I ask before we get into some of the more detailed stuff? So, being women, how do you feel about this from your perspective? Not from your background as a lawyer or as a diversity person, or having an investment in your careers in this kind of work, but just connecting to the woman's story.
Well, it'll sound just trite, but I'm just very impressed with the women who are willing to tell their stories and admire their courage for telling what happened and for putting it in a context of helping everybody get over the feeling of shame for having not done something, not stood up to someone in the past. A lot of why people don't do that, and it's really important to be able to talk about it, is that you think you won't be believed, you think you'll experience retaliation, and you're going up against someone, in most of these cases, with a lot more power and prestige within whatever organization you're in. And even without studying the issue, that it's not likely that they're going to get rid of him and you're going to keep your job. So the reasons that people don't speak out are totally understandable, and no one should be blaming themselves for having been silent. But it's very empowering to listen to women feel able to talk about it now. And hopefully it will free people who are currently experiencing harassment to speak up and to have the tools to do something about it right now.
Yeah, and I feel similarly. I feel really good, both as a former HR person inside of an organization, as a female who had my own experiences, my own Me Too moments with men in the organization, when I was also part of my responsibilities were also protecting other women. And I did not feel like I could disclose some of the incidences that I had dealt with. And so I'm just, I'm glad that we've really taken the covers off of this. Anything that it has us talking about more equity in the workplace, certainly both, on gender and on race. And, and what some research has shown is when there are more women and the numbers are better and there are more women in senior leadership positions, that there's a lot less of this kind of behavior, this alpha male behavior in many organizations begins to get checked when the numbers are more balanced. And so I think this is another window of pressure, even though we've been working this issue for several decades, to begin to move this because there's a much bigger voice around it.
The one thing I learned that I had not known is that a lot of women who experience sexual harassment are more afraid of reporting it than of dealing with it as just it is. So there's the event, right, which occurs, and that has a certain charge. But the idea of saying, hey, this is a problem is even more charged. And so that charge prevents them from, being okay with exposing it and turning, as you say, just pulling the covers over things and showing what's really, really going on, which I had no idea. I would just think if this happened to a woman, she would say something. That women didn't say something was not, that in such a large number was not clear to me. And so, I'm super excited about what's going on because I think, culturally, I feel like, women have such a huge role to play in making our world a better place. And the more we can bring them onto the stage, the better off we all are. I remember years ago here in D.C., it was like maybe 2003 or 4, we had a march on the mall, and it was predominantly women. And it was definitely organized by women. It was like hundreds of thousands of people. And I went, and I've been to lots of marches here. And it was so calm and so peaceful and so well run. I was like, please let the women run these things. I have really no problem with that. It was really, I think, a sense of it more around how we don't have enough feminine energy in the world, and the feminine presence is not honored and respected or given power. And that when it is, it's a really good thing for all of us. But we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
That's a good point.
You've been listening to The Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. We'll be back in just a moment. Hi, my name's Lauren Epstein, and every week at 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock on Mondays, I talk about jobs and careers and the workplace. We've done shows on pot in the workplace, the salary secrecy laws, and how to write a resume. I'm inviting you to come on our show. If you're interested or have show ideas, you can give me a call at 240-876-0276 or email me at lauren@electriccow.com. Or you can go to our webpage at laurenepstein.com or our Facebook page, which is also Lauren Epstein, and our Mixcloud account is, and you guessed it, Lauren Epstein at mixcloud.com. Hope to see you here on the show soon. Welcome back. You're listening to The Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. Today we're talking about sexual harassment. So I'm just curious, because we talked about Clarence Thomas. Do you think if this happened today, he would have been confirmed?
Judging from the political pressure on certain people in elected office to leave or not run again because of allegations about their misconduct, I suspect that he would not be confirmed. But, one of the things that's sort of interesting is the women that accused President Trump of sexual assault, basically. I know are standing around saying, wait a minute, what about what I revealed before the election? And when there's talk of possibly impeaching him, the answer is, but the American public knew everything about what he had done and elected him. So I'm not certain that an impeachment vote would really be successful, but I think there might be certainly a more receptive attitude toward those kinds of allegations.
So for anyone listening, they should just research that the justices, the Supreme Court justices, can be impeached.
Yes.
I think it's happened once or twice.
Maybe once.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think once.
Well, that's interesting. So let's talk about, now what's going on, right? So in our last show, we talked a lot about kind of what companies should do. But then since then, because we recorded it, I want to say it was like in the summertime?
August, yeah,
before this thing. And then when we broadcasted it, it just occurred. So, if folks are listening in the workplace, what should they be aware of? Like, what now constitutes, crossing the line, and what should we be aware of in our interactions at work?
Well, I don't think that has changed. The same conduct that crossed the line in August is what's crossing the line today. I mean, all that has changed is that people are coming forward and describing what's happened to them, starting with really lurid stories around Weinstein and other, media people whose conduct was. I mean, I don't think anyone would ever have thought that was okay to invite people to a hotel room and strip off your clothes and insist that they perform sex acts. That's not what's going on in a lot of workplaces, and but what is and what the lines are, I think, are the same they've always been. I just think what's changing is that maybe more people are questioning whether that kind of conduct has already occurred and they just let it go. And women are wondering if things have crossed the line that they just ignored, and men are wondering if their conduct has perhaps been offensive in ways they were completely oblivious to. So the actual standard of, not doing things that make people feel uncomfortable because of their gender, not making sexist jokes and calling women sexist epithets, all of that has always been seen as part of what would be an actionable hostile work environment claim. I suppose the part of the conduct that's for some reason more difficult for people to know is offensive is in the realm of sexual and romantic overtures, because people do socialize with people they work with, or they form intense relationships with people they work with. So if people ask one another out or compliment people on their appearance, perhaps they are unclear about when that is unwanted conduct, because the whole key is whether or not it's welcome. So if a man asks a woman on a date and she says no, that should be the end of it, and pursuing it further would be to persist in unwelcome overtures.
At work.
At work.
Yeah. So I know.
Well, maybe anywhere. Maybe men should realize when women say no, they mean no, instead of the fiction we've heard all my life that, women always say no. You just have to keep pushing because that's what they're supposed to do.
Right.
I think a lot of men actually believe that. And so and so now this kind of hypervigilance may be useful to begin to get people to sort of pay attention and check their behavior for when it is unwanted, and no means no. Because I do really think that some men, their brains are socialized in that direction toward women, and they don't back off.
There's a really just kind of, it's a funny scene in the movie Dumb and Dumber where the Jim Carrey character is interested in this woman, and he's like, "Is there any chance of us going?" And she says, like 1 in a billion, and he goes, "I got a chance." Like there's that chance, and that is true. So, and when I said the question about what are the lines, I think it might be good for us just to chat for a minute because we got some time. Is what are the lines? What behavior, men towards women and women towards men, that we should really avoid that maybe we haven't? Obviously, the clear things of don't touch people at work, don't overtly be sexual at work. But what are some of the subtle things that that people may do and not realize they're doing it. That, because like I know someone might say, wow, you really look nice today. And a woman or a man could take offense to that, right? Or that happens, right? There's this, I think maybe to help us understand.
I think it's the way you said it, because if you said, girl, you're really wearing that dress, that means something really different to me than to say you really look nice today.
Okay, so if it's like, the Supreme Court perception of pornography, right? I know it when I see it. What do we need to look out for? I mean, my concern is that there are good people doing stupid things, right? Not people who have bad intentions doing bad things. Because I think that we all know like what is wrong.
Well, beyond the touching or the comments about a person's body or appearance, I think people should not be having conversations in the workplace about the sexual behavior that they enjoy or experience or engage in with partners. They shouldn't be having conversations about their men should not be or women should not be having conversations about their sexual prowess or what they did last night with whomever. They should not be looking at pornography in the workplace or displaying pornography. And as you just said, so what's pornography? That's another question. But probably most people know what that is to them, and that's why they have it around, and it really doesn't belong in a workplace. What else? Sometimes people think their overtures to someone couldn't possibly be unwelcome because they're expressing love or affection. There's someone in Congress right now who won't be running again because he wrote a letter to a staff person, and this became public. And it became a joke on the Stephen Colbert show that night. One of the things the letter said, and this is a congressman in his 60s, married with children, to a 22-year-old staffer, "You're my soulmate." I don't know. He went out with her and wanted to get ice cream together, but he had become upset because she had a boyfriend and was thinking of leaving and going with the boyfriend somewhere else. And he had not revealed these feelings before, and then it became really, really intense, made her incredibly uncomfortable. But I'm just saying, people write love letters to someone and think that should be okay because that's a love letter. Mm-hmm. In the Ninth Circuit, there was a case like that once, and they said from the perspective of a woman, getting a love note can feel like being stalked because it's just creepy. It's very creepy when people you work with, especially a boss, is expressing those kinds of sentiments in the workplace.
So I, think that in some ways having conversation about what respect is in the workplace and what we're each looking for in terms of respect, and getting more definition or clarity around that, because so that we each know when we're crossing boundaries. Some things I think can be murky. I, having lived in California for a long time, I can't blame it on California. I'm a hugger. I do when I came in, right? And it's almost like an instinct. Yeah. But that's gotten. I'm trying to check myself, because.
So a friend of mine who's a male executive does not hug anyone. Right.
And if I were going into an organization still with someone I'd seen a long time, I now feel like I should, because of the amped up space of this movement, where people are paying attention to the behavior and the signals that they're sending, I feel like I also need to be more conscious of that. There was something else that you said that it had triggered a thought for me, in terms of how looking at these issues in the workplace, some of it I think is very difficult because you have, this is my imagination speaking, you have a lot of younger men, when men are younger, that sort of sexual energy is higher, and they, games are played and they're aggressive. And I think at the other end of the continuum, there are these older men in the workplace that sometimes as they get older, I don't know quite how to characterize it, but it seems like suddenly they're needing to feel that they still are attractive or appealing, but they tend to be hitting on these very young, not quite matured women who don't necessarily know how to deal with pushing someone back. That's that 20 or 30 year gap. I would like to see when we have some of these discussions that we can discuss issues even of, senses of what male masculinity and male identity is. I think conversations also ought to be going on around amongst men in organizations around how they see this. How do they think they should be checking the behavior? What new norms do men think are appropriate? And and invite the question of what kind of what do we want from them? Okay, in terms of both support when there's a problem going on. Don't need men who are bystanders, okay, who won't say something to a colleague that they see and just snicker and think it's funny. So I think there's a range of behavioral things that work themselves into the workplace that are kind of normalized. But that we need to really push in a deeper level into the culture about some of these other kind of conversations. Or, otherwise I'm concerned that, we'll have all of this, we'll just rely on legal mechanisms, and underneath it may not have the deep change around these things that we really need. So I want to see some things. I want to see additional conversations. I want to see women more empowered in organizations, and I want to see men having conversations about this issue. It's not just a woman's problem.
One of the things I noticed about what you said was that you talk about conversations, and in the workplace, we don't really have conversations. I had gone to a college fair where they were talking about, well, how do we mitigate date rape, and how do we mitigate problems with college kids dating? And they had this workshop where a young man and a woman were like on a date, and they gave like the first 20 people in the audience a little green go sign and a little stop red sign. And as everyone was paying attention, they would say, okay, they would do a behavior with each other, and then they'd ask the audience, red or green. And so then we kind of raised the consciousness in that kind of discussion of like, oh, that's what they mean. Because I think when in organizations, they'll get the sexual harassment training, which is something online or something canned. And it has nothing to do with how other people in the office are feeling. That if we could start having these dialogues between men and women, where women would say, this is the behavior I want, this is the behavior I don't want, I think it would go a long way in having men, become aware. I mean, I only can say this because I'm married and I have the same experience with my wife. When she tells me there's a problem, when she explains it to me how she feels about it and what's going on, then I know and I can change my behavior. But until I get that feedback, sometimes it's got to be really explicit because there's a lot of things going on in a human being's brain. And I think it's the same, for women. I think sometimes, women are away with men that doesn't really work.
I think that's an excellent point. There are studies that have been done, polls taken where if you just ask women, have you ever been harassed? Apparently about 25% say yes. But if you ask them if they've ever experienced behaviors and list out 8 or 10 things, the number goes up to 75%. So the word harassment is not particularly descriptive. And, well, it has a lot of connotations of being really mean and hurtful and bullying someone, and that's not what people think they're doing, or experiencing, so they say, no, I guess I haven't been harassed. But if you enumerate the behaviors that might be that, it's much more clear that a huge number of women have experienced
that. Yeah, so let's get specific. So what are some of the behaviors that constitute harassment in the workplace, of sexual harassment in the workplace, or harassment in the workplace?
Well, I do want to say there's a lot of harassment that doesn't involve of women that does not involve sexual conduct, and a lot of harassment of people on the basis of race and disability and age. And we're focused here on sexual harassment, but what a lot of women experience in the workplace, they wouldn't call it sexual come-ons. It's just humiliating and demeaning treatment because they're women and they're resented and vilified in the workplace. So the conduct is different in different work environments. There are places where men are so contemptuous of women who would dare to come into this place and do this job, like a fire department. I don't know if you read the stories about the I don't even know what community department in Virginia, that the woman that came in to try to improve the harassment situation recently resigned because it's just getting worse when women have complained about the atmosphere in the house, in the firehouse. They gave her a water bottle or something shaped like a penis, and when she complained again, they glued some duct tape-shaped balls onto the penis to show what they thought of her sensitivity to this kind of treatment. So I think there's some kinds of work that men do that they really think women are not entitled to even dare to enter into this sphere. Stock brokerages are a little like that. Law firms can be a little like that. So one of the worst industries is restaurants, where the behavior that women would find offensive is so rampant they become almost inured to it. I mean, we've had clients who it took a lot of digging for her to say, well, yeah, I guess they call me a bitch or a whore every day, but that was just so common. I wasn't even thinking of that as part of the harassment. So to return to do we just want to focus on sexual behavior in the workplace and how that can create a hostile environment? I think we've enumerated the things, but I'll start the list again and then Karyn can add more. I think any touching that isn't any touching, hugging, stroking shoulders, back rubs, neck rubs, all of that is offensive and inappropriate conduct unless it's invited, unless somebody has explicitly said they would like you to do that. And even then, I think the person being asked might wonder what's going on. And any kind of invitation to socialize outside the workplace where, of course you can ask people out, but if they say no, that should be the end of it. Unless they say, no, I'm busy tonight, ask me again.
And when I just back a little bit before I go to the list of things, but companies need to, I think, assess their workplaces for where they do have high risk environments that might lead to the kinds of things that you talked about, and whether it's a brokerage floor or the stock floor or a fire department. And so, when you have workplaces or sites where the job structure has high power differentials, or it's a remote site, or it's a work site where there's only one female or maybe two female and the other 90% of the workforce are male, those are high, can be, when it comes to these kinds of issues, those to me are sort of flags to say, let's assess the risk for these kinds of things and what do we need to be doing and how do we need to manage that particular place. I
just read a story about a woman who worked at the U.S. Forest Service as a fire person. And, they're out in the middle of no place, and she was the only woman, and it was horrible sexual harassment. Blatant and horrible. That's she was in the middle of no place.
Right.
There was no all the witnesses were men, and there was not really a place to go.
Well, apparently Silicon Valley and Uber, and
absolutely.
There are just a lot of technological companies that have this sort of high testosterone male environment that's, and not that there aren't women who can do those jobs and want to do those jobs, but they're not made welcome.
Right.
And
it's the climate that in there that makes it, not conducive or hostile, or you have to be very careful because then they don't see you as a team player. You don't put up with that sort of thing. I wanted to, we were talking about, so environments that are disempowering. and it just is one that for me, the sexual objectification, you think, no big deal. But it was a flashback from, when I first became a director in a company. And one of the colleagues, he was a mentor of mine. I love this guy. He was just, a wonderful human being. But when I joined the club, which meant the Employee Relations Council for the whole company, when I walked into that meeting, and he meant well. Oh, you look so beautiful today. Oh, that color on you, your makeup. Oh, And so the impact of that, while his intentions were above board, but the era that he was from to do something like that was disempowering for me, because all the other men on that console then looked at me and heard what I had to say through that lens. And so that's not, any kind of overt sexual harassment like some of these egregious actions, but that is also powerfully disempowering. Now, would anybody check him? I could maybe pull him aside outside. At that point, I was new at that level, and so I was hesitant to do that. He'd been my mentor. And I really believed he meant well, but he's from an old school, but I could see the effect of that kind of conversation and look in terms of how the other men dealt with me. I had to battle for space there.
I think even more important to what you're saying is that irrespective of how the men actually felt about you, it was about how you felt about the comment and how you felt about how they would be perceiving you. Like any boss, like saying, hey, this is Lauren, the new so-and-so, and maybe something not so flattering or something that took away my authority.
That's right.
Right.
Took away your authority.
So I think that we're getting to, something that we can all connect with is that if we're treating each other at work in a way that lifts each other up and empowers each other and makes each other look good, that's great. But if we're doing the opposite of that,
that's right.
And that's maybe where the boundaries of harassment are in general. Like if somebody walks into the office, I'm like, oh, here's Bill again. Boy, he stinks. He's not going to do a good job. And that kind of thing. I mean, it affects the company.
Or if we're sitting in a meeting and every time I say something, one of my male colleagues reinterprets what I said and said what she really meant. No, that was not what I really meant.
I hope I didn't do that.
No, not at all. But I'm just, but I'm expanding the example because these are the kinds of things I think that women experience all the time. She said that, but nobody really heard it because they don't hear her woman's opinion. He said that, now he's getting the credit unless somebody, a male colleague or another colleague says, but didn't she just make that point? So it is that kind of climate that also I think when that level of respect for women and that level of empowerment for women is not there, then you can almost bet that the women who are in less powerful positions are experiencing other kinds of harassment issues down further in that organization.
I'd, for some reason, really have to come behind that with when you're the woman who makes a comment and it's just falls on deaf ears, and then a man says the exact same thing and they all say, what a great idea. If you say, wait, that's what I said, then you're really being because you just don't know how to be a team player, and you've got.
I'm just looking at Apote. Is that okay that she said that, Apote?
Yeah, I could take care of that.
Okay.
I've said it several times.
I think that's one of the words they can say.
No.
Oh, okay. That's not one of the words you can't say the B word. So if you hear a bleep while she's talking, she said the B word.
It's sort of a catch-22. You really can't win in those situations. It's hard to know what to do to gain any credibility in a group when the general attitude is that kind of disrespect. And I guess that's how I see all of this, the comments about appearance, the sexual overtures, the whatever it is just not seeing someone as an equal in the workplace, as a work partner instead of a sex object, which is the way people are comfortable seeing women. So men are comfortable seeing women.
Let's move the conversation into, okay, now what? What can we do, right? I mean, let's talk about what solutions are out there for employers from the legal perspective, from the consulting perspective. How can we make this world a better place in the next 8 minutes?
So I think we've had, a huge emphasis on employers' policies against harassment and training of employees. And it was spurred largely by Supreme Court decisions that created an affirmative defense to a legal claim of harassment if employers could show that they had good policies and that somehow the victim, the woman, had not used those policies. And I think all of the training that employers have done with their managers has been around that, about how to avoid legal liability. I think that the power of the Me Too movement and the way the stories are being told now allows us to move on to talking, as you've been trying to do, Lauren, about, so what is the offensive conduct? And that what needs to happen in workplaces is what we're talking about, conversations among people about what's offensive and why, and how it makes somebody feel. So that training, to the extent we have that, needs to be more like that, more like consciousness raising about how perhaps with the kind of scenario you described with the students acting out what might happen on a date. Because I think the training that's common in most workplaces, and the EEOC would be the first to admit this, the training that they provide has really not been effective because this conduct is still rampant. So it hasn't been effective in changing the behavior. It's been effective in convincing employers they need to have complaint procedures, and that's about it. So I think the next step is what we're talking about.
Karyn?
Yeah. So in organizations, I think giving women more voice in organizations around these issues, more upstanders. I distinguish it from bystanders. We talk about sort of bystander training a lot, but just I like the notion of upstanders, to stand up for someone else, intervene or ask, hey, what do you think she thought when you said that? I'm not sure that landed very well. I mean, I think we need a lot more of that. I think very senior leaders in organizations need to not just, point out that they've got compliance policies in place and they've got reporting procedures in place, but they need to speak to, the respect issues, the kind of that they want women empowered in the organization. I think they have to take a moral stance on these kinds of things when they happen in the workplace, that when they happen in the workplace, they have to communicate it and not just have a culture of silence on it when it's become visible in a big public media, instead of everyone ducking for cover and not knowing how to communicate and creating an environment of distrust in the entire organization when you've had these really big visible kinds of cases. Right. I also think they need to do something with the human resources organization, because I've been a human resource professional. And I do think that that human resource people can get caught up in the dilemma of protecting the company and the senior powerful manager who brings in a lot of money and making the problem go away, move the woman to another department.
Right.
So I think that we really need to look at how HR is an organizational partner on these issues and navigates that territory. So, those are some of the thoughts I have around that.
And with that, I'm going to say we're going to wrap. So how can folks reach you, Karyn?
I'm at email is at ceo@ktaglobalpartners.com, and the website is ktaglobalpartners.com.
Awesome.
And the website for my law firm is Katz, Marshall & Banks legal.com. My email address is wheeler@kmblegal.com.
I want to thank you both for coming back again and talking about this really important issue. I think everyone got a lot of value out of it. I know I did. So thank you for listening to the Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, here on 96.7 FM. You'll hear us next week on WERA.